Hi, we are Donna van Milligen Bielke and Ard de Vries.
And what is postmodernity?
Yeah, so postmodernity is something that for us doesn't sound that nice. It sounds like something we don't really want to belong to because when I think of it, I feel like it's more of an iconic or ironic side of architecture.
Yeah, but when we started talking about it, we didn't exactly know what is the definition of postmodernity. What is the definition in the past? What is the definition in the future? And how do different people define postmodernity? So we do know what postmodernity means. What it says, what the definition is in the books. I think postmodernity started with the rejection of one truth. So we started to have multiple stories next to each other. There is a certain ambiguity in all these different arguments that could work together. When I look to my study back and the differentiation between modern and postmodern, we grew up in a time when Rem Koolhaas was the king at the TU Delft, and so it's not that he organized the university, but there was the idea that you had to work on one concept, one clear story. It all had one linear perspective. Then in a later phase during the masters, then Tony Fredden came in and he started to define that we could work with different stories next to each other, but Tony Fredden saw himself as a modernist, and we also see ourselves as modernists, but probably we aren't. But we're not always divining what we are.
Maybe we're modern postmodernists.
Something like that.
Because I also, when I think of postmodernism, I think a lot about using literal references from the past.
Yeah.
So we don't do it literally, but we do use a lot of historical references.
Yeah, and we always work with a lot of timelines next to each other, and there is no linear perspective in that, but that will come back probably in one of the later questions.
Okay, so now the question, which figure from the first generation of postmodernists do you consider important? What was the,
Consider particularly relevant to your own work. Yeah, so we work with so many different references, and I think that when we make it particular to postmodernity, then I always thought that my idea about working with postmodernity ended where it all began. So that's in 1966 with the book of we have it here laying on the office, the complexity and contradiction in architecture from Robert Venturi, which I always really liked as a book with all these references and all these different collections. But that was also Robert Venturi. He opposed this book against the orthodox modern architects, but we didn't have to do that as a generation opposed to this modern architecture, and so he opposed it as a break with tradition, but he didn't see himself as a postmodernist. He also saw himself as a modernist. And if you see then with which references we work, and that is, for example, for the moment, we were working in a pavilion, and I saw the exhibition in Art Décoratif in Paris from Ponti, and he had these really nice ceramic plates, but he also had the furniture, and we really loved one table with really nice structure with different colors, and we used that idea of that structure in the structure for the building, and also the way he used colors in that structure. But another thing is that now we're working on a building for a literature house, a writer's house, and we came up with this shape, and then we started to see that Hajduk, he also used something like that for a poetic house that he that was temporary house on the beach in Barcelona. But we also worked there with Le Corbusier, with La Tourette, the space, and how he enters the light. So we used modernist as a reference. We use the postmodernist as a reference.
So that's why we answer like this, because the question was which postmodernist do you think is important? But so we also look at postmodernists, but also but that's actually the third question.
Yeah, but that is also actually, so we look at both of them, the orthodox modernists and to the postmodernists, but looking at both means also that we act like postmodernists because
we're using different.
We use a lot of different stories altogether. And if, for example, that also has to do with the definition, because again, OMA, the first 15 years of their architecture practice, for example, I think the Kunsthal in Groningen was this modernistic block. Groningen? I said Groningen?
Yes.
Oh, Rotterdam. And this modernistic block. And then in that he made different narratives. He also used the columns with the trees around it, and on top of it is the red beams, some sort of homage to Mies van der Rohe, which is actually carrying nothing. So that is it's a building that reacts to postmodernism and to modernism, which makes it really fascinating building, I think. The definition of postmodernism is quite narrow. Is OMA also a postmodern architect? In our perspective, maybe now, in these first 15 years he was, but then not. The definition is changing. Next, what is the role? What role does architectural history play in shaping your work?
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to say before. So architectural references are really important for our work. So we don't really try to take something from the past and use it in the same way, but we see the whole history as a sort of a huge collection of shapes and precedents that we can use freely. So we don't use them in a symbolic way, but we just see a space that we really like, and we see how we can adapt and transform it in a way that it fits to our vision on the question for the project.
Next question?
No, I wanted to say that our biggest inspiration is not only the architectural history, but also the city as a whole. Because we look a lot at the city, and then most of all we look at the space between the buildings. So not really at the old buildings, but the way the city is shaped and evolving the whole time, and the spaces between the buildings. So I think that's even a more important reference or precedent for us in our work.
That's evolving in time.
That's evolving in time, yeah.
That's basic.
How
does your approach to history differ from that of the first generation of postmodernists?
Yeah, so I'm not really a theoretical architect, so I know exactly what their ways, but what I do know is that we're not against something. So, we're not against modernism. We also we don't want to be ironic and make like this monumental statements. Well, the thing that we definitely do not want to be is making historical architecture, like architecture that should look like it would be there forever. But so we do want to take the sort of the established logic from historical architecture, but make contemporary architecture with it. So, but I think that's a big difference. But maybe you know a bit more about the first generation.
Yeah, it was not so dogmatic as the first generation. It's
maybe we were a bit afraid. We try to stay far away from the first generation, I guess.
Yeah, we're scared.
Yeah, we don't want to belong to that.
But in other way, we use their references.
Yes, but freely.
Also freely. Yeah.
Then the difficult question for us: what is the role of figuration in your work? And we had a bit of discussion because we were not sure if we did figuration in our work, because we always feel that stuff we do needs to come from something, needs to be not really only functional but have a meaning and not only symbolic. But when we started talking about it, we also discovered that sometimes we do add.
We do.
Yeah, we do add.
And we do it, we always thought that there was content behind it and there was a reason, but sometimes we also just do it because we just think it looks good.
It looks nice, or it fits the project, and we still don't know exactly why,
But we always build up an argumentation why it's right to do that, but maybe that's a false argumentation. But
now also, I think that we are very strict about why we do things. But this is our only loophole. But sometimes we can be a little bit figurative.
Yeah.
What makes postmodernity relevant in current times?
It's a difficult question in a way of. I was thinking, and I was also referring to it. I was at a lecture from Rem Koolhaas at the Berlage Institute. I think, 25 years ago or 20 years ago, and he asked to the audience, is Ard de Vries still relevant for your work? And you had to put up your hand if it was, and I think from the 150 people or something, I didn't count them, only 2 people showed their hand. But that is actually, Venturi is for everyone still extremely relevant. And that is also the time where we live in. We live in a postmodern time. We live in a time where musicians sample their music, but they did it also already 100 years ago. But it's the way of that meaning and content have a loose relation to each other. And even if you say I'm not a postmodernist, you live in a postmodern time, so you have to act as a postmodernist to react to that time. And you also see that in the work and how we talk about it, which is when we say no, we're modernist or we're not postmodernist, or because we can't define that definition. We're in it. We're in the middle of it. It's all around us. And that is also, if we see how we work and we don't talk about it's with each other how we work, we just do it. As we have a reference folder with let's say 100 different references, and then
from all these different times and eras,
and 20 of them are postmodernists, or maybe 5. The other one are orthodox modernists,
or Roman Empire, or
but that is a typical postmodern, to use all these different ideas and stories next to each other. So it's really some sort of MTV architecture that you collect all these different samples and you bring it together.
And make it something new from this time.
Yeah, so the answer is you can't escape postmodernism. So we aren't, but we are.
But we're not.
No.
Yeah.
Maybe. We don't know.